Welcome back. Thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you have questions, throw it in the comments. Most of this video for my final assembly is going to focus on plumbing, hydraulic hoses, cooling systems, things like that. I'm going to hold off on the brake plumbing because I have a whole video getting ready just for the brakes on this buggy. So getting started, and here I go. You may have noticed while I've been working on this that I had the intake sitting up here, but I just had it sitting on top of the engine because I knew I'd have to remove it and then reinstall it after the engine was in. So I took some plastic, covered the intake ports up, used a real LS gasket to kind of seal the area off because I don't want contaminants in here while I'm working on this, especially the grinding and metal fibers that have been floating around in the shop. But right now, since I've decided I want to kind of get more of my hoses and such done, I need to put the intake on this, and I'm going to have to do that anyway. Since it's a hard part that can't be moved much, and it kind of has to go where it goes, I'm going to go ahead and install the intake. I'm also going to get my water ports installed for the heads up here. That way I can see where I'm going to be able to run hoses for my hydraulic steering and the fuel. I have this really cool little kit. It's got AN4 fittings, pre-O-ring. It's got the crossover hoses, all the sectional hoses, and I'm going to try to end it out here on the front of the engine, and I'm going to use a adapter piece to get the port to the cooling system. This one right here is the one that will exit and go to the cooling system. I'm deadheading the left rear port, T into the right rear port, T into the right front port, bridge it over and terminate it to the left front port, and that'll give me my area to go around it and tap in. Now I can cut this hose too if I need to, but this gives me the most options right here. Okay, now I can start bolting all this stuff down. I will bolt the lower fittings in first, and then I'll keep these off until I have the intake on. If you remember, I've also got towels stuffed in here in my intake ports. I really go out of my way to really try to keep everything in there clean. So as I'm pulling these out, I'm going to be using a vacuum so that any debris that falls will get sucked into the vacuum, not drop into the valve train. Now this is an LS1 intake, so it has the O-ring style gaskets. Like so much on these LS engines, it's a multi-pass torque sequence. Start from the inside, work your way out. But it starts at 44 inch-pounds and then goes to 89 inch-pounds on the second pass. So I'm just gonna run these down a little bit and then get the old inch-pound wrench out. Sometimes decisions are made for you, and then you don't have to think about it yourself. I hadn't decided where I want to enter the fuel system at, either here, here, or here. I know I'm not entering it up here. It may be easy to enter it up here, but then it interferes with possible exhaust over here. It also interferes with my oil fill. So I'm going to enter the fuel here and here. And what helped me make that decision was this cooling system bypass, because I had to kind of change a little bit of the routing. I had to use the front tube and go under the intake, and the back one wrapped around, and you go out a side and into a top. It really came out clean, but it just wasn't what I initially expected. I'm not going to zip tie anything down until I have everything in place on the engine. Right now I need to run my bridges, and then I will swap one of these. I decided to make my fuel inlet over here. That way I would have a nice, smooth, straight, no hard bends. I can drop it down, keep it away from the exhaust, and then bridge it over. Should be an easy run for the fuel system. Just in case, because things do get a little tight doing this, I went ahead and mounted my steering reservoir, and it's a good solid mount. I've got the third leg coming down, plus the uppers, and I haven't tightened this clamp up yet, but I will. I've got just enough room to run my hose, and I'll run it down where, if this purges, it'll purge on the ground and not onto my chassis. Okay, but when I was searching for this fuel rail, it popped up that people that bought this buy that. And it came with the T, the gauge, and I put it where I can actually, if I don't have the floor in, I can see it from the driver's seat and make sure I have fuel pressure if something happens. I wanted to try to make the factory dipstick work. I just like them better. I think they're more accurate. They tend to stay in put, but I am going to be making some modifications. Now I'm trying to keep this tucked up close. I know I'm going to have to probably trim my little heat shield, but I can get my spark plug in and out here. I had to build this feed hose just to know where the clearance would need to be, and I got that okay. So now I just need to tack weld this together. Before I start making a bunch of hoses, I decided I'm going to kind of finish putting this front support in, mostly because with this support and then the cross support, that's where some of my clamps and hangers for supports will go. So I want to make sure I get those hoses the right length so they reach the clamps and things I'm putting in here. If you've all watched any of my videos on building hydraulic steering hoses, you've probably seen this. So I am just going to do this once for my buggy build videos, since I'm in the Department of Hydraulic Steering. The outer part of the rebuildable fitting is a left-hand turn on these. And you can see the hose coming up as you are turning it in. It's just threaded ridges. It's not a fine thread or coarse, it's just fine, or just ridges. Once the hose is in the top, and I silicone everything just so it reduces heat, goes in a little bit easier. These start pretty easy. seem to have the wrong wrenches for every single one of these. I just finished doing another one and it was a different size than this one. Now once you get within maybe a half or a quarter turn of being all the way tight, I always stop there because you may need to clock your fitting, especially if you're using angled fittings on both ends and not a straight fitting on the other end. Once I have one fitting done on a hose, I'll take this big length of hose over and I'll attach it to the one end, and I will mark specifically how long I need this hose cut. Once you determine where your other hose fitting goes, I mark the hose right there. You can use a hacksaw. This makes smoke and stinks, but it's really fast, so that's why I use it. You're not going to cut this steel hose with a pair of hose cutters. And then just repeat what I did on the other end, on this end. On these repairable hoses, like I said, leave this a half turn, quarter turn loose so that you can clock it in the right direction, because these hoses aren't going to flex and turn. Now, I put this end on, I lined this end up, and then I marked the hose with a vertical line, and I marked a line on the fitting side where I want it to line up with. So now, basically I need to go almost 180 degrees, and I should be right where I want to be. I'll double check it again, but that's probably first couple hoses I got built. Now this is an AN8. This is an AN6. The 8 goes to my pressure regulator. The 6 comes back to the reservoir. All right, here's my routing so far. I've got my main intake line to the pump, pressure line from the pump to the regulator, regulator to the kickback valve over here. Kickback valve goes down to the joystick for the rear steer. That's all the further on the pressure side I've got. From the orbital valve up here under the cowl, I've got the low pressure line that comes around and feeds the cooler. Then the cooler comes out, comes back down and feeds the tank. I've got 4 pressure lines left to plumb. The 2 going from the orbital control valve to the front, and the 2 going from the control valve to the rear steer. Oh, and I do have the pressure line yet to build from the rear steer control valve up to the orbital control valve. This is something that makes plumbing these hydraulic lines a lot quicker. Hook the fitting to one end of the hose, route it as far as I can, figure out exactly how far, or real close to how far I need it to go, and then cut the hose. And then instead of unhooking everything, I just roll my vise around, attach the hose, and I'm off and running. Now, since I've got 90 degrees on both ends, I am not able to clock it as easily, so I have to turn my fittings, and it's only about a quarter turn, half turn. Oh, and I've got the rear steer hydraulic lines in, and I wrap them with the anti-abrasion stuff. I figure if something hits them, or if they start rubbing on anything, that might save me some headache. My other piece, you can see I have it installed, I don't have it tied in yet, but this piece of red PEX, I run my fuel line through, and I only run it under the seats. Now, the reason I do that is if you have a line rupture, I really don't want atomized fuel coming up under my seat and catching fire. If a line ruptures, say right here, it might spray fuel, but it's gonna reliquefy and it's gonna just push it out one of the ends, and it's not gonna create an atomized fireball if it ignites. I think that's just a little safety issue I've had. And this is the second buggy I'm doing a build out that I've done that on. I've also got my front steer lines kinda in. They're not really in. Now I'm really tightening up my routing, and I'm gonna put hose holders in various places. Now again, this is a me kind of a thing I like to do. Most people building buggies and cars don't put a permanent tab because it makes it harder to adjust the specific length of your link. Now, I've already got the link set, so I know where this link's gonna live. If for some reason I have to change it, I can get it a quarter turn by adjusting each link individually, or half turn, one turn at a time from the center. So to me, it's not that big a deal. I'd rather have a hard tab here to bolt to. Now on this opposing upper link, I'm gonna set a couple tabs up here, and this is where my ARB airline is gonna go and my brake line is gonna go. But I'll need 2 tabs on this one to secure that line. So I weld the front tab on this control arm in. Just a little trick I figured out. Figure out about where you want your second tab, and if you want them on the same parallel, bolt a piece of steel down to one side, make sure your gap is equal all the way across, and then you can tack weld your second tab in and it'll be straight. There you have it. Now I can run a straight hard line, and then I'll run soft line up to here and there somewhere. And I'm doing the same routine on the rear here. Make sure it's at the same plane. I have them different distances because I'm not wanting to bolt them in the exact same location. Now that I have the tabs welded in here, I'm just going to set a couple of hard lines in. And I bought kind of they didn't really have much of an assortment at the parts store, but I bought a couple of hard lines, and I will adjust and decide if they're the ones I'm going to use or not. And I want a hard line here, and I've got a couple of reasons. First, if you use some hard lines and not all soft line, you tend to get a better pedal. They're more rigid than running soft lines to all of your brake parts. The other reason is I've got an ARB airline, and that will give me something solid to attach it to as I run it along the link. It kind of protects the flex line with the hard line. Kind of a cool little deal here. These are my transmission lines. Transmission lines only have to go from here to there. So sometimes small amount of real estate that's beneficial. I really try to attach things. I don't like things wobbling and moving around. So I reversed a bolt coming up through the bell housing here on this lower holder, and I built a little cross clip, and I will bolt it down. Show that here in just a minute after the paint dries. And then my transmission lines will be secured, so I don't have to worry about things coming loose from vibration. as I'm getting this plumbing and stuff together, as parts come in, I'm kind of doing stuff as it comes. So right now, I got my oxygen sensor, so I went ahead and threaded those in and just left the wires kind of hanging over here out of my way because I don't know where the harness is going to set yet. I've installed new spark plugs, and since these were broken off, I went ahead and got the heat shields that go over the plug. Now, installing the wires, something I always really like to do, especially on these newer ones. I put a little bit of silicone or dielectric grease in the boot on both ends. Just in the event I have to take them off, I think I have a better chance of not tearing the boot that way. And once I get all these wires and plugs in, I've got the dipstick in. I don't know if there's going to be much else on this side that I'll have to do. I'll have to run some wires to the starter, but that's really out of the way. Then when I put that heat shield I made on, I'm sure I'll have to cut some areas and tweak it a little bit so it fits, but I'm still going to try to leave as much of that heat shield intact as I can because I really want to try to keep that heat from just baking you when you're in this thing driving. Now that I'm doing, I guess you could call it pretty much a final assembly, and I've started permanently mounting a lot of these fixtures. I'm going to go ahead and, while I'm waiting for parts again, mount a bunch of my lighting. I'll probably go ahead and mount the headlights and the interior lights because I can take the headlights out as a complete assembly. After I get these lights at least bolted in, I am going to make sure the grill fits okay. I run into that a lot when you go to final assembly or finish fitting something. It doesn't always fit like you initially planned. Perfect. I just got the wires just kind of tied up here right now, but I put a little bit longer bolt in the bottom mount, and that will serve as the ground wire. And then I have a high and low feed for the lights on the brightness side. I like running the battery main cables pretty much about the same time I'm running hoses because they don't bend and route as easily, and I kind of need to know where they're going before I start running the smaller wire around it. On the cables I build, I always use red for battery, direct positive, and I always use black for negative. And then I will, once it leaves the fuse box, color coordinate it after that. And then I'll run a piece of heat shrink over that, in like Flynn. As I'm continuing to clamp and tie up things like fuel lines, I've got about a 6-inch loop in the hose that leaves the fuel filter, and then it'll drop down below the tank. And I've got it clamped in there so it's not going to move around, get caught on anything. But I have a reason for that. First of all, I don't know if I'm going to continue with this style of fuel filter, if I'm going to change it to ones with fittings or just spouts on the end that I can use a clamp on. I like things that I can do trail repairs on if I need to. This gives me that extra bit of line in case I do need to do a trail repair. I can cut the line, just run a straight filter, or bypass the filter altogether if I have to. That's just kind of one of those things I like to do. Well, as they say, things change as you go. I like my cooler, and remember I built this little firewall piece, but I've had to trim a few additional sections out to fit it in now that I've got hoses in. That's okay. I've notched me a place right here for a harness to come through, and I've notched a second place over here for another section of harness to come through. That should do that. I also brought my fuel line up a little higher. I think it'll be less prone to abrasion and heat. These universal cooling hoses, the ones that fit well. This one I had to trim the bottom of. The bottom, I can't use this hose. It is just too long of a span. So I've got a 90-degree down here, and it'll meet up with the straight on the other end, and then I will put a piece of aluminum 1.5-inch tube between them. Get a couple clamps on these, and the rear side will be ready to go. Long span, I couldn't find a hose that would actually go that distance, so I got a piece of 1.5-inch aluminum tube, and then I flared the ends of it so that it can't slide or anything like that. If I had a bead roller, I'd do that, but both ends are flared, and I just use connector hose from the radiator to the tube, and then on the upper hose, or the other hose, I should say, I've got it routed, and that's just a single piece hose. Now I got to go to the front. The lower universal hose worked absolutely perfect on this. The upper one, not quite as well fit, but it worked according to plan. This has a nice bend that comes up over here. Now, I'll have to cut the hose and turn it, but I have to cut it anyway right over here in order to fit in the piece for my steam ports out of the heads. What I did is on the upper radiator hose, I ordered this inline temperature sensor mounting assembly. The temperature sensor obviously goes in here, and then this little Allen here is for a ground strap because this is non-grounded once you've just clamped it in rubber. However, I'm going to modify this piece as well. And what I'm going to modify in this is I'm going to drill a hole in here, and I'm going to mount a like an 1/8 FIP or quarter F, I think it's 1/8 FIP. Anyway, a small nipple coming out here, which will then have my steam port hose coming off the heads. Aluminum sometimes is hard to get it to start straight, but once you get it going, it really cuts easy. It's a little softer than I prefer pushing down while I'm threading these. That way, until it grabs enough threads that those threads hold the cutting piece down, it'll cut instead of pull the threads back out. Then I've got my 1/8 nipple. And you can get aluminum or brass. I happen to have a brass one, so I'm just going to use it. Make sure your nipple portion is the right size for your hose if you're doing that. You can get these in bigger or smaller. Might happen to be quarter. There we go. Make sure you start straight. Guess while I'm here, I may as well go ahead and install this piece, and I don't have to come back to it later. Oh, overboard on my glue there. All right. Of course, different size. I've cut my radiator hose where I think I will need it, and then strategically, I'm going to want this end up. I'm just doing a test fit, and then I'll clamp it, make sure I have room for my clamp here, make sure I have some room for, that looks like it's supposed to be there. And then, of course, this hose will come down here and grab it. I've got a holder for that, so that looks like a winner. I may have to take all this back apart, so I'm still not going to add coolant, but I'm just going to snug up these hose clamps. That way I know all of my alignment is correct. I think that'll do it for this video. Got so much more. I don't want to put together a 6-hour video for one assembly. Still a whole bunch to do, but I'm really excited because there is a lot of light at the end of this build tunnel here, and then you get to start having fun with it. So again, thanks for watching, and go do a little 4-wheeler. Beautiful day to run Moab rim. Last night, the lines are going to be interesting today. You got your turbo diesel here. Easy.
Put your tire on that nub on the passenger side.
These Gladiators are so nice with the wheelbase. The only thing I don't like is it got so much overhang. They drag the rear bumper pretty good. It's a nice line. It's gonna miss the bumper and everything.
Straighten up for a second. Cut it this way. in a, I got that rim sitting in a storage shed. Come up and go that way. Come faster. Now turn right.
On your passenger side, but you're fine.
Once you're at the top, you look down and check out Moab. We'll go over to the overlook now and well, that was the first overlook. Now we're going to go up to the big overlook. Now we're at the second overlook. Walk over here and look over the edge.